fried chicken sandwich. That's right, because of all the recent hoopla, I attempted to make a copycat Popeye's fried chicken sandwich. And you'll be happy to know I was actually very successful in making a copycat Chick-fil-A fried chicken sandwich. At least appearance and texture-wise, the taste really was very close to Popeye's. So I guess what we have here is the best of both worlds. And to get started with this incredibly delicious hybrid, what we'll do first is make our marinade, which is going to consist of some buttermilk, some salt, some hot sauce, and then by far the most important ingredient in this entire operation, some dry ranch dressing mix. And the one I'm using here is from a certain valley that's fairly well hidden. But anyway, we'll go ahead and mix this up. And the reason for the dressing mix is not just because of the herbs and spices. It's because it contains copious amounts of MSG, which in case you're wondering is really the reason that people line up for fast food. Right, besides the convenience and low prices. Okay, it's a proven scientific fact that MSG makes everything taste better. Like a lot better. And some might even say addictively better. And then what we'll do once our marinade's mixed is go ahead and find a couple chicken breasts to toss in there. And what I'm using here is some boneless, skinless breasts, which do not contain the tenderloin, or fillet, or finger as it's called. Okay, so if you see that piece of finger-shaped meat, you should probably pull it out and use it in a salad. And then one thing I like to do before we dunk these is take a sharp knife and make a few relatively shallow slashes in the thick end. Right, like 3 or 4 one way and 3 or 4 the other. And you may have actually seen us do this trick when we prep chicken for the grill. And what that's going to do is help our marinade get into the chicken a little better. Plus, it will also help that thick end cook a little more evenly in relationship to the thinner end. And then what we'll do once those are prepped is go ahead and toss them in our marinade until they're very well coated and submerged. And once that's been accomplished, what we'll do is transfer this into the fridge to marinate for anywhere between 2 and 4 hours. Right, that is my recommendation. Some people say you can go overnight, but for me that might be a little too long. And then what we'll do while that's chilling in the fridge is go ahead and make up our breading mix, which is going to be mostly all-purpose flour, to which we will add a little bit of cornstarch, as well as some salt, along with its good friend freshly ground black pepper, and of course some cayenne. And not a little, a lot. If you want your fried chicken breast spicy, which I do. And then we can finish up with the rest of our dry ranch dressing mix powder. Because MSG. And please note I added that with 1 spoon, and then grabbed a different spoon to give this a mix, for no apparent reason. And then once that is combined, we can move on to the final component, the wash, which for me is going to be nothing more than 1 egg, plus some buttermilk, and a little splash of regular milk. And once that's all in there, we'll give it a mix. And by the way, in future experiments with this recipe, I'm going to figure out a way to turn our marinade into our wash. But for now, we're just going to do it separate. And that's it. Once all our components are ready, and our breasts have marinated for a sufficient amount of time, we can begin the breading process. And that will involve using a fork to pull our chicken out of our marinade. And we will let almost all the excess drip off. At which point we will coat that very thoroughly on both sides with our seasoned flour breading mix. And for filming/demonstration purposes, I'm just going to do one here. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that other one back in the fridge, so I can make that for Michelle later. And then what we'll do after that first flouring is go ahead and shake off the excess before giving it a dip in our wash. And then once that surface has been saturated, we will go back into the flour, again coating it very thoroughly on both sides. And we are actually going to do this twice, which is hopefully going to give us a nice thick, sort of gnarly and irregular surface, which will hopefully fry up nice and crispy and crunchy. And I'm not sure, but for some reason I switched to my hands here, which did not work as well as the fork. Right, your fingertips are going to sort of rub off that coating. So when you do this, just use the fork all the way through. Oh, and I should mention, some people claim that Popeyes uses cornflakes in this breading, which they say creates that extra crunchy surface. But I've eaten a lot of that stuff, as in like a dangerous amount, and I've never really seen or tasted what I thought were cornflakes. So I'm not really sure about that. And of course, if you have any inside info, let me know. But anyway, getting back to this, I managed to give it the old double dip. After which I transferred it onto this rack, so we can let it dry for at least 15 minutes before we fry it. Okay, you really do want to give your coatings time to adhere before you fry things. And at this point I was thinking, this is looking pretty good. Right, that surface sort of looked like what I was going for. Although some people say you can dip and dredge that like 3 or 4 times to get even more of a gnarly coating. And maybe more similar to what you see at Popeyes. But anyway, I stopped at 2. And like I said, we're going to let this sit for at least 15 minutes before it hits the hot oil, which of course you've heated up while you're waiting to a temperature of 350 to 375. And once up to temp, we will carefully place that in. And we're going to go ahead and fry this for about 4 to 5 minutes, depending on the size of your breast, or until it's beautifully golden brown and crispy and safely cooked through. And you don't have to, but about halfway through I gave mine a flip, because I really do love to play with my food. And yes, in case you're wondering, you can totally pan fry this in like an inch of oil in a cast iron skillet. That will work just fine if you don't have a deep fryer. So that's up to you. I mean, you guys are after all the olive oils of your fried chicken sandwich oils. And I don't mean olive oil the oil. I mean olive oil Popeye's girlfriend, which is spelled O-Y-L. And if you know that, you're old. But anyway, like I said, we'll go ahead and cook this for about 4 or 5 minutes, at which point we'll pull that out and transfer it onto some crinkled up foil. And that's so the bottom doesn't get soggy, which can happen if you drain this on a paper towel, since that bottom will steam. But here with the foil, we have room for that to escape. And speaking of crispy, this sure looked right, but of course we have to check. And as you well know, fork don't lie. In fact, I saw someone wearing a t-shirt that said that the other day. But anyway, that sounded just about right. On both sides. And I couldn't wait to see if it tasted right. So I spread some mayo on a lightly buttered and toasted hamburger bun. And for the full fast food experience, do not buy some beautiful artisan bun from a bakery. Right, go to the grocery store and look for the package that has the most ingredients, because that's the one you want. And other than the mayo, the only other thing this is going to get is some sliced dill pickles. And then we will place our absolutely gorgeous chicken breast on the top. And then lean our bun like this and take a bunch of pictures, at which point we'll place our bun directly on top and take a bunch more pictures. And then, finally, about 10 minutes later, I went in for a bite, which, as you're about to hear, was still very crispy. And just as importantly, incredibly delicious. Right, that meat was super juicy and flavorful, and really was reminiscent of Popeye's fried chicken. But while that coating really was beautifully crunchy, it really did not have the same level of crispiness that Popeye's fried chicken does, and was way more similar to a Chick-fil-A sandwich, which I realize is good news for some of you, but bad news for others. So like I said in the intro, I somehow ended up with a hybrid of both versions. But there was one problem that really doesn't even sound like a problem. 2 large breasts. Okay, the breasts I used were like 8 ounces, and what you really want for this sandwich is like something between 4 and 6. Alright, the chicken to crispy breading ratio is off here. And when you have this amount of steaming, moist meat, and that thin amount of coating, it's actually going to start to separate and come off, as you can probably notice from these eating shots. Which is not like an actual serious problem, like fast food addiction. Oh, and one other thing that wasn't really a problem was this coating not staying crunchy after sitting for a while. Right, this was like over 15 minutes later. And as you can hear, it still had the sound to astound. But anyway, that's it. My attempt at a crispy fried chicken sandwich. While this didn't come out exactly like the ones at those aforementioned chains, it was still very good. And by being able to make this at home, you don't have to worry about some fast food store running out. And if you want, you could eat these on Sunday. So amen to that. And I'll finish by saying I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with the Madame Cristo. That's right, this started out as an attempt to do a little bit of a twist on the Croque Madame, but upon completion I realized that basically I had made a Monte Cristo sandwich with a poached egg on top. So with the help of a new friend on Twitter, who goes by the name of Zap Shakur, who came up with a much better name for sure, we're actually going to call this a Madame Cristo. But mashed up names aside, this really was extraordinarily delicious, and here's how you put one together. And first up, we'll make the batter in which we're going to dip our bread. And that's going to start with 1 large egg, to which we will add a splash of heavy cream. And yes, if you want, you could probably go with milk here, which won't be quite as rich. And then we'll also want to toss in a big pinch of salt, as well as a little shake of cayenne. And then we'll follow that up with a little bit of nutmeg, which as usual we will freshly grate in. And then because I do want some lemon flavor, but don't want the acidity, I'm going to go ahead and grate in about a teaspoon of zest. And believe it or not, that's going to be it for this very, very simple batter. All we have left to do is take a fork and give this a mix until two things happen. First, all of our ingredients get mixed up thoroughly, but also we want to keep forking this until the mixture goes from kind of thick and viscous to something a little thinner and more runny. Okay, something just about like this. And once that's been accomplished, what we'll do is simply set that aside and move on to talk bread. And for this, I'm suggesting we go with something white, tasteless, and devoid of any nutritional content. And while yes, you can make this with whole grain bread, you never should. And then one little trick we're going to do before we build our sandwich and dip it in the egg, we are actually going to give it a light toasting first. All right, not too dark, be careful. And what that's going to do, besides obviously adding some toasty flavor notes, it's also going to dry out the bread a little bit, which is going to help it soak in the batter. So just a little trick I came up with back in the 80s. I think it was the 80s. And then once our toast is done, we'll go ahead and add our ham and cheese, or in this case, cheese and ham. And traditionally, we would use Gruyere, but because this sandwich is going to be pretty decadent, and Gruyere has such a rich, buttery, nutty flavor, I decided to go with something a little milder and used Havarti. But literally any melty cheese would work. And then once that's down, we'll place on our ham. Except we have a major problem. Our bread is square, but our ham is round. A problem that stumped mathematicians for centuries. But eventually, a famous ham geometrist discovered the solution, which was just simply cutting the ham in half, thereby creating straight edges, which allows us to perfectly align our meat up to the edge. So it really was quite a breakthrough, and way easier than inventing round bread. And then what we'll do for those shorter sides is simply cut those last pieces in half, and we'll finish that off as shown. And by the way, since we're going to press this together, we could have just done that on one half. But it really doesn't matter, as long as we eventually and carefully press these two halves together, at which point we're going to dip it into our egg mixture. And I say dip, but I really mean soak, since we want our bread to absorb the maximum amount possible. So take your time, flip it back and forth, until you're sure it can't take any more. Oh, and I should mention I'm doing a totally savory version here. But if you wanted, you could use our regular French toast batter, which has a little bit of a sweeter flavor profile. It includes things like a little bit of cinnamon and vanilla. So if you want to switch that up, go ahead. I mean, you guys are after all the San Franciscos of your Madame Cristos. And speaking of fryers, once we've reached full saturation, let's head to the stove so we can pan fry this in some butter, over medium heat, until golden brown and crispy on the outside, but also until the inside's heated through, and our cheese is nice and gooey. And other than just keeping an eye on it, the only tip here would be not to use too high of a heat. Alright, I said medium, but you might need to adjust, since we don't want the outside cooking too fast and possibly burning before that cheese inside gets all nice and melty. And then besides pan frying this, we will also want to fry or poach an egg to put on top. And if you're just doing one or two of these, you could probably do it at the same time. But if you're doing these for a large group, I'm going to put a link in the blog post that explains how to do that completely stress-free, as well as it will show our complete poached egg technique, since I'm not showing that here. But anyway, the point is we're going to need to cook an egg. And while that finishes up, we'll go back and check our pan, where as you can see, everything's looking quite nice. And I really should have thought to do a fork scrape here, so you could hear just how crispy this was, but it didn't occur to me, so I apologize. But anyway, once we're confident our crustification is complete, we'll transfer that onto a plate and possibly garnish it with some greens. And once our prop salad is set, we'll go ahead and top with our poached egg, which of course we've gone ahead and pulled off any of the ugly stringy white parts. And we will finish that off with a little shake of cayenne, as well as some strategically placed sliced chives. And while ultimately this didn't turn out to be the thing I planned it to turn out to be, it was still absolutely magnificent and would have been amazing even without the egg. But with the egg, well, just watch. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. And I'm actually getting smarter in my old age, as I cut a piece from the back so as not to wreck that full frontal view. And if you're thinking that hot honey ham with melted Havarti, sandwiched between crispy fried French toast, topped with a poached egg would be delicious, you could not be more correct. This really was phenomenal. And even though I did go 100% savory here, as I was eating this, I was thinking, this would be really good using a sweeter batter for the French toast. Which in that case, I might top it with some maple syrup. Or not. Depends on my mood. So whether you're planning on making this for some fancy brunch, or for just some casual weeknight dinner, or you simply can't decide between having a Croque Madame and a Monte Cristo sandwich, I really do hope you give this incredible concoction a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with the Cuban sandwich. That's right, as promised, I'm going to show you how I go about putting together a Cubano sandwich. And I really don't do that many sandwich videos, since if you give your average person on the street a list of sandwich ingredients, they can generally figure out how to put it together without a video. But here we're going to make an exception, because this sandwich is so, well, exceptional. And to get started, the first thing we'll do is put together our secret sauce, which is going to be equal parts of mayonnaise and yellow mustard. No, not Dijon. All right, we're doing a Cubano, not a Franco. But anyway, we'll do equal parts mayonnaise and mustard, and then finish that off with a little shake of cayenne. And then we'll go ahead and give that a mix, and that's it. And then once our sauce, which is really a spread, has been mixed up, we will move on to the rest of the ingredients. Okay, so for this epic sandwich, we're also going to need some pickles, which must be dill and preferably hand-sliced lengthwise. We are also going to need some sliced Swiss cheese, and please use something nice. I forget the name of this one, but I remember it was pretty fancy. And then we'll also need some thinly sliced, preferably smoked ham, as well as some kind of roasted or pulled pork. And whereas some chefs prefer thick slices of the pork, for me the sandwich is so much better if we use torn up pieces like this. And while that gray meat might not look impressive in the pan, it used to look impressive, since we're using our famous paper pork for this. So that would work beautifully, as would our pulled pork shoulder recipe, or any one of our carnitas recipes. But you are going to need some type of pre-cooked and hopefully succulent pork. And then what we'll do once we have all our fillings pulled together is prep our bread, which in my case is a day-old loaf of Cuban bread. And what I like to do is trim off both ends. You don't have to, but come on, the birds have to eat too. And then we'll split that in half, since I think half a loaf makes the perfect Cuban sandwich size. And then of course we'll have to split that open, taking our time, being careful to get it as even as we can. Oh, and another thing we're going to go over on the blog is whether it's better to use fresh bread for this, or day-old Cuban bread. It's a little controversial. But anyway, once our bread is prepped, we will apply a generous amount of our mustard mayonnaise spread to both sides. And please try to go all the way to the edges. Only a psychopath would leave part of the bread unspread. And then once that's set, we'll start building up our sandwich, starting with a couple slices of cheese, followed by a few slices of ham. And of course, you will be determining exactly how much you're going to put of everything, since you are, after all, the Phyllis Diller, if not a filler. But that looks like a good amount to me. And then once our sandwich has been hammed, it's ready to be porked. So I'm going to transfer over a very generous portion of our broken up paper pork, which, by the way, must be heated up before it's applied. All right, this should be steaming hot, except I'm always scared to shoot steaming things. Plus, they always cool down as I'm moving the camera around. So while this doesn't look very hot, please pretend it is, since that is one of the keys here. And then once our pork shoulder has been applied, we'll go ahead and top that with our dill pickles, which, as I mentioned, have been hand-sliced lengthwise. Hey, if you want to use machine slice, go ahead. It just won't be the same. And then we will finish our masterpiece off with 2 more slices of cheese. And we'll go ahead and press on the top of our bread. And that's it. Our Cuban sandwich is ready to grill, which I'm going to do in this nice heavy cast iron pan. And we will toast this over medium heat in just a little bit of melted butter. Although, you know what? We probably should have used a little lard next time. And once that's placed in, what we'll need to do is press it down somehow, which I'm just going to do with another pan. But anything flat and heavy will work, including things like bricks wrapped in foil. And all we're going to do here is toast that for 3 or 4 minutes per side until that bread is nice and crisp and browned, and everything is heated through, which, by the way, is why it's so important your pork is hot. Okay, if you fill this with cold pork, by the time that got heated through, your bread would be burnt. And of course, if you have one of those panini presses, this sandwich is exactly what those things were made for. So before you do this in a pan, check your garage and your closets and your cabinets. You may have one stuck in the back you forgot about. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and toast that in butter or lard over medium until we think it's perfect, at which point we can cut that in half and eat it. And because people complained I didn't scrape the crust in the Cuban bread video, let's have a little listen to the crispiness before we cut. Oh yeah, the sound of success. So we will go ahead and cut that in half. And while admittedly this is not the most colorful or visually beautiful sandwich, it makes up for that in literally every other way. So I went ahead and served that up with some taro chips. Plantain would have made more sense. But anyway, we will serve that up with the chips of our choice. And while this may appear to be nothing more than a hot, cheesy meat bomb, it's actually not super heavy and very, very well balanced. Yes, we do have a lot of richness from the cheese and the ham and that succulent pork, but all that is balanced very nicely with the tanginess of our mustard sauce and our pickles, with everything being encased so wonderfully in that crispy hot bread. So just an absolutely stellar combination of taste and textures. And I could have easily gone on for another 5 minutes talking about how good this was. But I decided to stop filming and eat the rest, which turned out to be a great call. But anyway, that's it. My take on the Cuban sandwich. I really do hope you bake off a couple loaves of this amazing bread, and then give this incredible sandwich a try very soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Inside Out Grilled Cheese Sandwich. Actually, it should be called Inside and Out Grilled Cheese because we have cheese in the inside, as you can see, but we also have crispy, crunchy, caramelized cheese on the outside. This is the ultimate grilled cheese sandwich. I'm going to show you how to make it. Take some real butter, melt it in a pan. You're going to need a nice nonstick pan for this. And I don't know why people try to spread cold butter when they make these things and they tear up the bread. Melt the butter in the pan, much easier. By the way, there's only one choice for grilled cheese. That, of course, is white bread. Check the ingredient label. You want to make sure there's no fiber. Save your wheat bread for the turkey sandwiches. And there's only one cheese, extra sharp cheddar cheese. I know. What about American cheese? I said there's only one cheese for this sandwich. That, of course, is not cheese. I'm using grated just because I had it, but this will work with slices of cheddar also. So we put our portion inside. We flip the top over. Now that top was just in that hot pan. So I'm going to put some additional grated cheddar on top of that. The heat from that butter is going to melt the cheese slightly. I'm going to add a little more butter to the pan. I'm going to flip it over so the cheese is down. And I'm going to do the same thing to this side. About a tablespoon or so of grated cheese. And basically we're going to toast that slowly. I'm on medium-low heat. You don't want to go too high here. You don't want the cheese to burn. You want it to get crispy and caramelized. All right, so it was about 3 or 4 minutes on that side. I flip it over so I can crisp up the other side's cheese. And you can hear how crispy that gets. It really is just truly amazing. You know that cheese that drips from the pizza and kind of burned onto the edge of the crust and it's all crispy and crunchy and delicious and everyone kind of, maneuvers to get that piece? This is like a whole sandwich of that effect. Anyway, there you go. Inside Out Grilled Cheese Sandwich. I mean, look at that. Cheese on the inside, crispy, crunchy cheese on the outside. This thing is cheesier than karaoke night on Jersey Shore. At one point, I was, let's just say, involved in a group of cooks that were not only hungry, they partook in things that made them extra, extra hungry. They have given this grilled cheese sandwich their stamp of approval. So you know it's got to be good. So anyway, go to the site. There's not ingredients. It's bread, cheese, and butter. It's a technique, but go to the site anyway. And as always, enjoy. Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Nashville hot chicken. That's right, when I first heard about this stuff, I thought it was some kind of internet hoax. I was supposed to believe that they take crispy southern fried chicken, and then before serving it, they drench it with cayenne-infused lard. I mean, that sounds totally made up, and possibly illegal. Well, as it turns out, it's not made up, and completely legal, and one of the most amazing fried chicken dishes you will ever taste. So I am very excited to show you my version, and that's going to begin with what's basically a marinade. So we're going to go ahead and add some buttermilk to a mixing bowl. And by the way, for the record, in the original recipe, this is just regular whole milk. But I do prefer the buttermilk. And then as you may have noticed from the intro picture, this is always served with pickles, which of course come in a brine, and I'm going to add some of that brine right into this mixture, followed by a very generous amount of hot sauce. And that one people like to use on wings is very popular for this, but I don't like that brand. Shh, don't tell them, they might be a sponsor. So I'm going to toss in a less popular, but what I think is a more delicious Louisiana hot sauce. And then last but not least, we will crack in 1 large egg. And then we'll take a whisk and mix that thoroughly. And as soon as all that's been completely combined, our marinade is done and ready for our chicken, which, as you can see here, has been cut into the traditional 8 pieces. Of course, we have your 2 legs, your 2 thighs, a couple breasts, and a pair of wings. And I know I've showed you guys how to cut up a chicken before, so I'll try to remember to add a link to the blog post. But anyway, we're going to need 1 cut-up chicken, which ideally you've tossed with some salt the night before and left it in the fridge. But I'm going to be honest, I didn't do that, since this was kind of a last-minute decision to film. And as you'll see, this is still going to work out beautifully. But if you can plan it out, seasoning the night before is better. And that is another issue I will explain in detail on the blog. But either way, what we'll do is go ahead and pour that marinade over our chicken, and then take our tongs and make sure all that's mixed around very well. Okay, chicken pieces are famous for their nooks and crannies. So I'm editing this, but take a minute or two and make sure all those pieces are thoroughly coated. And then once that's been accomplished, what we'll do is wrap this and transfer this into the fridge for 2 to 4 hours. Now, can you do it less time? Yes. Can you do it more time? Sure. But I only guarantee the same results if you do it 2 to 4 hours. So we will pop that in the fridge, and while we're waiting, we can go ahead and do our seasoned flour, which is super easy, because all we're going to do is take some all-purpose flour and add in some fine salt. And sure, if you want, you could use kosher, but I much prefer the taste of the fine. Yes, that was a joke. At least to some people. But anyway, we're going to add some salt to the flour, and we'll give that a stir. And in case you're wondering why we're not adding a bunch of other spices into this, that's because we're going to be finishing this by brushing on that highly seasoned spicy sauce. So we're just going flour salt here. And then once that's prepped, and assuming our chicken is marinated long enough, we can go ahead and pull that out and start the dredging. Double dredging to be more exact. So how I like to do this is to pull that chicken out of the marinade and sort of wipe off any excess and let it drip back into the bowl before placing that on some paper towels. Because what I want to do here is sort of blot off that excess liquid. And I'm doing that for 2 reasons. Since this is going to be double dredged, meaning it's going to go in the flour twice, I like to do that first application of flour without the chicken being too wet. So we'll pull that chicken out of the marinade and sort of blot it off a little bit with the paper towels. And then the other reason, because we didn't do the overnight seasoning with the salt, I'm going to give these pieces a little extra seasoning with salt right here. And at that point, we can start the double dredging process. So we will take our chicken pieces along with our reserve marinade. Oh, don't throw that away. We're going to need that. And we can start this double dredging as shown. So we'll take a piece of chicken and toss it in our flour. And we'll roll that around until it's completely coated and there are no wet spots to be seen. And we'll go ahead and shake off the excess and pop that right back into our marinade. And we'll kind of toss that around until it's coated and then let most of the excess drip off before returning it back to the flour for the second dredging. And once that's been thoroughly and thoughtfully coated a second time, we will transfer that to a rack, and that's it. Okay, so to summarize, first we make it wet, then we make it dry, then we make it wet, then we make it dry. And that really is the key to Nashville hot chicken perfection. And speaking of keys, we want to make sure we're using the old wet hand, dry hand method. Okay, you see how I'm using my left hand just for the flour and my right hand just for the milk mixture? That is definitely the recommended technique. Otherwise, it's just super messy to work with. I mean, as it is, it's already super messy. But we don't want to make that worse by having our fingers all gunked up. So using that old wet hand, dry hand, we'll continue on until all our chicken has been double dredged. And then what we're going to do next, which is a very underrated step, is we're just going to let this sit out on the countertop for 15 minutes to sort of dry out a little bit. All right, that's going to give this time for that coating to kind of set up. And I really think you do get better results. And it really does help if you use a rack like I'm using here, so we get some air circulation underneath. But if you don't have a rack for whatever reason, you could just crinkle up some foil. That works too. And then what we want to do during that 15 minutes is go ahead and make our sauce. So into this pan, I'm going to toss some butter and some lard. I don't believe I've ever said that before. And then to that, we're going to add a little touch of cayenne. Actually, we're going to add a whole spoon. You know what? Make it 2 spoons. And by the way, if you think that's an insane amount of cayenne, the actual original recipe is about 3 or 4 times that much. So I'm going to do this only with 2 tablespoons of cayenne. And then we'll also do a little bit of garlic powder, as well as some sweet paprika. And then speaking of sweet, we want to do a little bit of brown sugar and a touch of salt, as well as some freshly ground black pepper. And once we have all that together, what we'll do is place this over medium-high heat. And all we need to do is cook this for a couple minutes stirring until those fats melt and everything gets heated through. And sure, this might look a little scary, but don't be afraid. The food gods hate a coward. So have faith. And if everything goes according to plan, it should look something like this. And once that's set, we'll turn off the heat and just keep that on the back of the stove warm until we need it. And assuming that our chicken is now sat out for 15 minutes, we can go ahead and start frying. And today we're going to be doing that in a cast iron skillet, which we'll fill about 1/3 of the way up with vegetable oil and heat to 350. And once our oils reach temperature, we will carefully place in our chicken, skin side down, at least for the breast and thighs. Legs and wings don't matter. And of course, once we add that in, the temperature of the oil is going to drop. But then it's going to come back up. And what we're going to try to do is maintain a temperature of 325, which could mean you're just going to stay on medium-high heat, but maybe not. So that's going to be you cooking, adjusting that temperature, tweaking it a little bit up, a little bit down. And as far as the cooking time goes here, it's going to be about 8 to 10 minutes per side. But I guarantee nothing, and you really should check with a thermometer, and go to at least 160 internal temp. And if you want, feel free to turn this just once, but that's not how I do it. What I like to do is let the first side go for about 6 or 7 minutes. Then I will go ahead and turn those over. And I'll give that second side about 6 or 7 minutes. And then I'll turn it back over for another minute or two. And then if it needs more time, I might even turn it again. And what I think happens with these additional turns is because some of that coating is above the surface, it cools down a little. When we turn that back over, we get kind of a twice fried effect, which is going to result in an unbelievably crispy, crunchy chicken. So that's how I do it, and I have great results with that. And if you're afraid it's going to absorb more oil that way, don't be. It really doesn't. And even so, did I mention we're going to brush this with lard? So I'm not sure that's really going to be a problem. And of course, if you fried chicken before, you know all the pieces aren't going to finish at the same time. So I pulled my wings out first because they finished first. And then I continued on until everything was cooked perfectly. And again, to be safe, you'll want to check with a thermometer. We're shooting for at least an internal temp of 160. So once we've determined our chicken is cooked long enough, we will remove that to a rack to drain. And by the way, in case you were wondering, no, I was not trying to be artistic with this shot, where you blur the foreground and then focus on the background. That's really more so me not knowing what I'm doing. So at this point, let me go ahead and distract you by grabbing a fork and letting you hear just how crispy this stuff comes out. But as good as that sounds, it tastes even better. So let's go ahead and plate up. And there's really only one acceptable way to do this, and that's on top of sliced white bread, okay? The cheaper, the better. Okay, we want something that contains no fiber and even less nutrients. So we'll place down our hot fried chicken on what technically qualifies as bread. And then we will finish this up by generously brushing over our spicy sauce, preferably to both sides. And by the way, down in Nashville, they literally dunk the pieces of chicken in like vats of this stuff. So I'm sure there's a few people down from those parts that are laughing at me with my dainty brush. So if you'd rather toss these pieces with the sauce or dip them in, that's up to you. You are the T-Bone Pickens of how to sauce your Nashville hot chickens. But anyway, we're going to generously apply our spiced butter lard mixture. And then right here, if I was a famous food photographer, I could have left those drips. But I'm not, so I cleaned them up. And then for a final touch, we'll finish this off with some slices of bread and butter pickles. We definitely want something on the sweet side here, so we can balance the heat from the cayenne. And that is it. Our Nashville hot chicken is done. And looking absolutely stunning. So let me go ahead and grab this napkin and silverware and not use them. And I'll go ahead and grab a leg and bite into what is probably the best fried chicken ever. Just insanely crispy. That meat is moist and flavorful thanks to that spicy buttermilk marinade. And then permeating everything, we have that cayenne and spice infused butter and lard. That is just an absolutely incredible bite of food. And because I was in a hurry and only brushed sauce on one side of the chicken, I'm going to stop and brush on a little more. And I believe in the business this is called relarding. But anyway, that's it, my take on Nashville hot chicken. Normally I would have filmed me eating the rest of that piece and probably 1 or 2 more pieces. But this video is already way too long. So I'm going to stop right here and finish off by saying I really, really, really hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with the St. Patty Melt. That's right, if you think substituting braising greens for the burger and a patty melt sounds crazy, you're not alone, since that's what I thought. But then I tried it, and I was treated to one of the best grilled cheese sandwiches of my life. And to be clear, my love for burgers is borderline inappropriate. But this St. Patrick's Day inspired meatless melt, and play on words, was nothing short of phenomenal. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by prepping our greens. And for this, I ended up using 2 kinds. some beautiful dino kale, as well as some equally gorgeous mustard greens. And as usual, we'll be using the old grip and rip to remove those tender leafy parts from the tough stems. And of course, other similar greens will work here. Right, things like Swiss chard or escarole would also be lovely. And the reason we're tearing these leaves into a big giant bowl is because once we're done, we will fill this with nice cold fresh water and give these a nice thorough washing to make sure there's no silt or sand or dirt attached. And as you swish these around, that stuff should fall to the bottom. And because that stuff sinks, we will remove this by pulling the leaves out of the water like this, straight into some kind of colander or strainer, where we will leave it to drain thoroughly. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for that to happen, we can go ahead and salt some water and bring it to a boil on high heat. And we really do want to be generous with the salt. All right, if done properly, this should taste like seawater. And using enough salt here is one of the secrets to making delicious greens, or really any vegetable for that matter. And then what we'll do once our water comes up to a rolling boil is go ahead and transfer in our greens. And once in, we'll take a spatula and try to make sure they're all pushed below the surface. And then what we'll do once that water comes back to the boil, which should only take about a minute or two, is just simply boil these greens for 3 or 4 minutes, at which point we will carefully fish those out with a strainer into a bowl. So we're talking about a relatively short cooking time here, okay, because we only want these greens barely tender and not soft. And that's it. Once we have those out of the water and in a bowl, we will simply set those aside and let them cool down to room temp, at which point we can safely squeeze out all the water. All right, if you're impatient and try to do that while they're still hot, you will burn your hands. And believe me, I speak from experience. And of course, here I am trying to pull a stem I missed out while it's still scalding hot. You're welcome, fans of irony. And then what we'll do while we're waiting for our greens to cool is go ahead and melt a whole bunch of butter over medium heat in a skillet, preferably Irish butter if you can find it. And to that we will add some minced garlic, as well as a whole bunch of thinly sliced green onions, also known as scallions or spring onions. And we'll also toss in a nice big pinch of salt. And what we'll do is cook these stirring over medium heat for about 5 minutes or so, or until they just start to soften up and turn translucent. And while that's happening, we can go ahead and add in any additional seasonings, which in my case are going to be some freshly ground black pepper, as well as a few shakes of, oh yeah, you guessed it, cayenne. And we'll go ahead and stir that in. And like I said, we're just going to cook this long enough for those onions to kind of soften up and start to sweeten, at which point we can add our blanched greens. And of course, since we always want to try to multitask while we're cooking, while our onions and garlic are sauteing, we can go ahead and squeeze all the water out of our greens, within reason. All right, don't pull a muscle, but we do want that squeezed out very thoroughly. And that's it. Once that's been accomplished, we'll simply chop this up as small as we want, which for this grilled melt I want to be pretty small. All right, nothing will ruin the experience of eating a perfectly made grilled cheese than a big long molten hot kale leaf being pulled out of the sandwich causing second-degree burns to your chin. I mean, good luck explaining that scar at work. So we want to chop this into small bite-sized pieces. And that's it. We'll go back and check our onions, which I thought were looking, feeling, and smelling just about perfect. And if that is the case, we'll go ahead and stir in our greens. And we'll continue cooking this stirring on medium until those greens are just heated through, which is only going to take a couple minutes. And once we think we're getting close, we'll go ahead and give this a quick taste for salt, which if we used enough in our water should be fine, and mine was. And that's it. To finish this, all we're going to do is turn off the heat and drizzle in about 2 tablespoons or so of seasoned rice vinegar, which as you well know has a little bit of sweetness to it, which pairs perfectly with these earthy, slightly bitter greens. And by the way, just a little splash of regular vinegar plus a pinch of sugar will do the same thing. And at this point, our braising greens are done, and we can go ahead and transfer those into a bowl to cool. And of course, everybody knows how super nutritious these kind of greens are. But unfortunately, they are only super delicious if they're prepped and cooked properly, which I believe, evolutionarily speaking, is how Mother Nature rewards the smartest and most clever cooks. And even if you never use these greens to make a grilled cheese sandwich with, you should still master this recipe. Because whether you're talking about serving this as a side to meat, or used in a pasta or scrambled in some eggs, this stuff is just shockingly delicious. And I know that sounds crazy if you don't like greens, but seriously, you gotta trust me on this one. And that's it. Once our greens have been properly prepped, we can proceed to make our St. Patty melt, which you'll start by melting at least a few tablespoons of butter over medium heat, and then placing in a couple slices of nice thickly cut bread, in my case some beautiful French bread. And besides hopefully using Irish butter, please make sure you use a lot of it. All right, one of the only ways to screw up a grilled cheese sandwich is to not use enough butter. And then what we'll do next, of course, is go ahead and place in our sliced cheese. And in keeping with our St. Patrick's Day theme, we'll be recommending some nice sharp Irish cheddar. No, not Irish setter, Irish cheddar. But of course, having said that, you can use any cheese you want. But personally for me, the best pairing with the greens would be a nice sharp white cheddar. And then once our slices of bread have been cheesed, we'll go ahead and place down about a half a cup of our greens on one side. And one tip here, make sure your heat's not too high, because we need to give ourselves enough time to place on our cheese and greens without that bread getting too dark and charred. Okay, because once this is constructed, we can always continue grilling until it's as golden brown as we want. But we can never unbrown something, at least not in this universe. So err on the side of too low a heat setting. And then what we'll do once our greens are on the scene is go ahead and place that other slice on top, and we'll give that a firm but gentle pressing. And that's it. I'm pretty sure you guys know the rest. We'll simply continue grilling this, flipping it over as we see fit, until that outside surface is beautifully golden brown and crisp, and our cheese is nice and melty and our greens are heated all the way through. At which point we'll remove that to a cutting board, and we'll go ahead and cut that in half. Of course at a slight angle, because it's a proven scientific fact that people prefer pointy food. And I'm sorry, the sun was going down and I was starving, so I didn't do a fork scrape. But who cares, because look at that. And I went ahead and served that up next to some radishes and cornichons. And as soon as I had placed that down, I remembered one thing they taught us at Food Blogger School, which is we're supposed to lean one of the halves up like this, so we can take some beautiful and provocative pictures. Which I did, and way too many. But finally, eventually I bit in, and like I said in the intro, even though this is a burgerless melt, and a St. Patrick's Day inspired play on words, it's also one of the most delicious grilled sandwiches I've ever had. And if you were ever looking for a recipe to trick your loved ones into eating these incredibly nutritious greens, this is the recipe. And by the way, if you're just too scared to try the braising greens, you could if you want to do this with spinach. I mean, you are after all the Celtics of your melt tricks. But I really do hope you give it a try this way, because that combination of the kale and the mustard greens ends up tasting like spinach wish it tasted. And I sort of can't believe I'm saying it, but if I had to choose between this melt and a classic patty melt with a burger, I really think I would choose this. And if you're thinking, why do we have to choose? Can we have both? Well, yes, you can. Although, and I'm just brainstorming here, I would think a nice ground pork sausage patty might work even better with the greens than a beef burger. But of course, there's only one way to find out. But anyway, that's it. What I'm calling a St. Patty melt. Whether you're just looking for something incredibly delicious to eat, or you're just trying to figure out an easy way to get your family to eat these incredibly nutritious dark leafy greens, or you simply can't believe my claim that this melt is actually better than the one with the burger. Either way, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.